my spooky friends, and welcome back, or welcome to my channel. Today I have another true crime ASMR video for you. Today we will be talking about the case of Karen Reed. This was recommended by MandyJandLilJAsmr 411. She had recommended this quite some time ago. I'm so sorry it took me so long, but here we are. So, on a snowy morning 2 years ago, Boston police officer John O'Keefe was found unresponsive in the front yard of another officer's suburban home. He was pronounced dead shortly after, and his girlfriend, Karen Reed, was charged in his murder. If you enjoy true crime ASMR videos, I would suggest you pop over to my true crime ASMR series playlist. And this is where you can find past and future videos in this series. If you have any recommendations for future videos, please leave me a comment in the comments below. I do get to every single one. Life has been busy lately, so it may take me some time, but I will always make time for you. Now, let's get into it. Karen Reed is a 42-year-old equity analyst and part-time professor at Bentley University. Karen owns a home in Mansfield, Massachusetts, but spent most of her time with John O'Keefe in Canton. They had known each other for years, but been dating for 2 years. John was a beloved man of his community. He was a 16-year veteran of the Boston Police Department. John was 46 years old and really known just for being the good guy. An example would be that a few years ago, prior to 2022, John's sister had died of a brain tumor, and a few months after her death, her husband would die of a heart attack. John would adopt his sister's children, his niece and nephew. On January 28th, 2022, the Canton, Massachusetts weatherman would state a major snowstorm to pass through. Despite the weather, Karen Reed and her boyfriend, John O'Keefe, were not strangers to the snow and decided to go out for a date night. So, it's a Friday night, the kids are in bed, and Karen and John are off to their favorite bars to drink with friends. So, the couple will go to a bar and run into a friend, Jennifer McCabe, and we were underlining Jennifer McCabe. She is very important. And with Jennifer is another Boston cop, her brother-in-law, Brian Albert. Now, the people surrounding this case are important, and it gets a little messy because there's so many people involved, and all of them are linked in some way to each other. Like, either someone is married to someone else and it's their in-law, it's everybody, it's like this big web, and they're all connected. So Jennifer McCabe and Brian Albert meet up with Karen and John. Brian Albert is married to Jennifer McCabe's sister, and Brian knows John, but not very well. They were just acquaintances. Brian is actually a trained boxer and was so good that he was even featured on a TNT TV show. And he is the leader of the Fugitive Apprehension Team. Brian would invite Karen and John back to his place to have drinks. And I'm going to add that all of these people were heavily intoxicated. No one should have been driving. Like, the alcohol was not only flowing, but it was stated that they had been at a rate of 7 drinks in 2 hours. And these aren't just drinky drinks. This is liquor. Now John, he was down to continue the party at Brian's place. Karen, however, she wasn't feeling it, and reluctantly she would accept to driving John to the party and dropping him off there. As they leave, John would grab a half-full cocktail glass from the bar, and he then would climb into Karen's 2021 Lexus SUV. She would proceed to drive the 2-mile drive from the bar to Brian Albert's house. So from this point of getting to Brian's house, we only have pretty much Karen and witness perspectives of what happened next. John was feeling a little awkward since he's going to this party at a friend of a friend's house, and so they pull up to the house. John gets out. He agrees to text Karen that he's at the right house and when he is going inside. Karen states she waited for a text, didn't get one, then proceeded to back up and go back to John's place. And she would keep trying to call and text John and would get no response. And she would then fall asleep at 1:30 in the morning and wake up on John's couch at 4:30 a.m. At 4:30 a.m., John was not home, and Karen had not received any response from him. So Karen's first action is to call the person that they both were familiar with, Jennifer McCabe. Now, Jennifer McCabe says, "Oh yeah, I haven't seen him." Click. That's it. That's all she gets from Jennifer McCabe. And by 5:30 a.m., Karen is freaking out. It's a snowstorm out, and she has no idea where John is. So Jennifer McCabe, Carrie Roberts, and Karen start driving around looking for John in a blizzard. It's not only a blizzard, it's freezing cold. The temperature for that evening was about 18 degrees. The 3 women would go to Brian's house to look for John, and as they're pulling up to the house, Karen would spot a mound that looked like a body covered in snow in the front yard near the street. Karen would bolt from Carrie Roberts' car to the spot and would frantically start digging in the snow. And she would find John O'Keefe frozen stiff. There would be blood around his mouth and nose, abrasions on his arms. His eyes are purple and swollen, and he was missing one of his sneakers. Karen would call 911 at 6:04 a.m., and John would be pronounced dead by 7:50 a.m. Now, during all of this, no one from the house comes out to help. There is a woman screaming about her dead boyfriend, and no one leaves the house. The Alberts would stay inside until John and Karen are taken to the hospital. So they pretty much only came out to talk to the cops. And these are all people in law enforcement. First responder who? So, there were first responders. You had Karen screaming. There was a lot of commotion. At the hospital, they would draw Karen's blood. And even after sleeping for 4 hours, her blood alcohol content was at 0.07. And then it was 0.08 earlier, around 3:45 a.m. The police lab suggested it would have been around 0.13 and 0.29 around the time that she had dropped off John O'Keefe. Now, police are beginning their questioning, and they're feeling out Karen, asking her and her friends just things to understand the state of Karen and John's relationship at the time. Pretty early, Karen had stated she only had 4 drinks that night, but it's estimated she was around 9 drinks that night, which we all know she was just trying to not say that she was drinking and driving. That's obviously what was going on here. But anyway, Jennifer McCabe, who is the friend that Karen called at very first, was already interviewing with police, and she would tell them that Karen told her that Karen and John got into a fight that day, and that Karen was so drunk she didn't remember dropping John off at Brian's house. In fact, she was so drunk the night before, she hardly remembered anything. Karen had voiced to Jennifer that she wasn't sure if maybe she had hit him or he had been hit by a snowplow. Jennifer and Carrie would tell police that before the 3 women went to look for John, Karen showed them a cracked passenger side tail light on her SUV, and that she didn't remember it looking like that before she went to the bar. A paramedic also told police that Karen kept saying, "I hit him, I hit him, I hit him." And that was when EMS arrived on the scene. As you can imagine, the police believe the order of events are pretty clear. Karen drunkenly dropped John off, and when she left and backed up, she had actually backed up into John before leaving. 3 days later, Karen would be arrested for manslaughter. Now, John's autopsy showed he has several bloody abrasions on his right arm. Both of his eyes were swollen black. He had a cut above his right eye, a small cut on the left side of his nose, a 2-inch gash on the back of his head, and he also suffered from multiple skull fractures. Despite all of that, John O'Keefe died after hypothermia set in. Police would find a broken cocktail glass near John's body, which is the same one he had taken from the bar. Later that day, the police would find pieces of red and clear plastic scattered around the scene, which was consistent with Karen's broken taillight and John's missing shoe. The shoe not being far from where John was found. Investigators would search Karen's car for evidence and would allegedly find glass embedded in the rear bumper, which is allegedly from that cocktail glass from the bar. There's also a dent and a deep scratch on her trunk. Scratches and chipped paint were in that deep scratch on her trunk, and allegedly a single hair. Karen would plead not guilty, and she would hire David Yannetti as her lawyer. However, David, Karen's newly appointed lawyer, was on his way home when he received a bizarre anonymous phone call. The caller claimed that Karen was innocent and she was being framed. The caller claimed that John was beaten up by Brian Albert and his nephew. And I've tried to find this nephew's name, and it's just not consistent enough for me to use it, so we're going to use nephew. So, allegedly, they had only intended on roughing up John O'Keefe, but when John wasn't responding, they left him outside in the cold, and just roughing him up. His eyes were swollen black. He had gashes all over his body. He had skull fractures. You're beating him pretty hard for those injuries to happen. So, allegedly, Karen stated she remembered John and Brian's nephew having tension. In the spring of 2020, Karen says that John's alarm system went off and they sprinted downstairs to find the nephew along with a group of drunken teenagers in their front yard. John would tell them to get the F out of here and other curses, and obviously the conversation got pretty heated and they never left, and by morning John's lawn was covered with empty beer cans. And we find out that this nephew is very connected with everybody as well. It's very abundantly clear that in Canton, the police force is this manipulative group. Not all of them. I don't want to be sounding like I don't. But there's too many. John is a police officer. Why didn't he arrest him? Maybe because this kid has Brian Albert as his uncle, and before I get too ahead of myself, David Yannetti would start focusing on the autopsy of John for more answers. When he and Karen both agree that John looks like he got the crap beat out of him, and I agree. Yannetti argued that the gashes on John's arm look like animal bites, more specifically dog bites. And at the time, Brian Albert owned a canine German shepherd named Chloe, who was at the house at the time of the events. The Alberts' rising list of red flags did not stop there for Yannetti. The lead investigator on the case, Michael Proctor, would turn out as being a very good friend of the Alberts, and despite the obvious bias, Proctor took the case, and Facebook pictures would show this nephew being the ring bearer at Proctor's sister's wedding. Now, as time goes on, this case seems to completely unravel as the snowplow driver that night told investigators he was plowing the Albert Street between 2:30 and 3:30 a.m. on January 29th, and John's body, he states, was not on the lawn sometime after 3:30 a.m. The driver allegedly saw another SUV. He thinks it was a Ford Edge, and that was parked near the spot where John's body was later found. But allegedly, when Proctor interviewed the boss of the snowplows, that guy said that no plows were sent to the Albert Street, and that was the official story. Due to this statement, things were not looking good for Karen, and her charges were actually bumped up to second-degree murder. Police now believed that Karen intended to run over John with her car on January 29th, 2022. Trooper Proctor would arrest her himself in June of 2022. After posting her bail, Karen knew she needed to hire a high-profile lawyer, and she would hire Alan Jackson. Alan is a criminal defense lawyer who is famous for representing Kevin Spacey and Harvey Weinstein. Not a good move, Karen, personally, but whatever. If you want someone to get you off, I guess. Karen's lawyers alleged that when Karen left to go searching for John at 5:30 in the morning, she had backed up and actually hit her taillight on John's car. They brought forward John's ring light footage, which they state shows her breaking the headlight there. They then state that the shards of that cracked light were then collected by someone else and planted at the crime scene. Another useful piece of evidence for Karen came from Jennifer McCabe's search history. Good old Jennifer. Jennifer had Googled how long to die in the cold at 2:27 a.m. And this was all the morning of John dying. She had actually typed out how long to die in the cold. She was drunk. And as we have stated many times in this video, alcohol was heavily involved. And Jennifer allegedly tried to cover that search up. The same search appeared twice more at 6:23 a.m. and 6:24 after Jennifer says Karen told her to Google hypothermia. The big question then arises if there is actually any evidence that proves John had even gotten inside the Alberts' home. Karen's team alleges John's Apple Health app for his Apple Watch recorded 80 steps and climbing the equivalent of 3 flights of stairs. And this was after Karen allegedly dropped John off. Karen's team believed this proved John had gone inside where some kind of violence occurred. According to everyone inside the party, John never made it inside, although some people at the party do remember seeing Karen's SUV, but thought John had just went home with her. The prosecution claims that the Apple Health app's data is unreliable and brought up stats on how they are 33% incorrect. As for Jennifer McCabe's Google search at 2:28 a.m., forensic experts say it's because she used a tab she had opened at 2:27 a.m., but she only Googled "Ha's long to die in the cold" after Karen told her to when they found John's body. Anyway, according to the medical examiner, John's injuries were the result of blunt force trauma, not a fight. Data was retrieved from Karen's car, and it showed that she had reversed at a very high speed the night John died. Now, the question is, did anyone on the Albert Street have security cameras? Did anyone have a glimpse of what happened? And the Alberts told the investigators they did not have one installed. The prosecution would interview the niece and nephew that John had adopted, and the kids had said the couple fought often, and that John had actually said he wanted to break up with Karen. Voicemails between the couple would be pulled by prosecutors, and the text messages between Karen and John. These would reveal a toxic relationship. After Karen dropped John off, Karen called and texted him 40 times, asking him where he was and why he wasn't answering her, which the defense argued that showed more so why she didn't do it. However, in one of the voicemails, prosecutors find Karen saying she hates John, and they state that is the motive. A lot of the defense's arguments included Brian Albert's nephew and John's tension, except the nephew would claim he left the house before the after party that night. For those who knew Karen and John personally, to their knowledge, there was no problems between Karen and John. For over a year, the Karen Reed case didn't get much coverage, besides in Boston and Canton, and I personally believe that this was on purpose. But this case was kept quiet until Aiden Kearney, who was a controversial blogger known as Turtle Boy, began blogging about the case. On April 18th, 2023, he posted his first blog on the case, Canton Cover-Up Part on Corrupt State Trooper Helps Boston Cop Cover Up Murder of a Fellow Officer, Frame Innocent Girlfriend. Very long title. But this blog went viral, and his entire blog was his entire case against the Boston Police Department. Trooper Proctor and everyone involved with allegedly framing her for murder. This theory had split Canton in half between those who were pro-Karen and those who were pro-Boston police. Now, as this case has gone on, more has come out about the investigation itself. It turns out that there are like 30 people involved in this case, besides just Karen, and they are all linked by either marriage or family. It turns out that Jennifer McCabe is good friends with literally everyone involved, including Michael Proctor. Michael would be known to have stated there was no conflict in interest in this case. However, there would be text messages found from Michael Proctor where he is sending nasty messages about Karen, like calling her the C word, and her saying she was hot but not having a butt, and that Karen was guilty. And these text messages were sent 16 hours after John's body is found. At this time, he had only spoken to 3 witnesses, and these were all people from the party and this large, inner circle of friends and family. It would later be discovered that investigators never went into the Alberts' home that night and did not secure the crime scene. They never cleared it off as the crime scene is being investigated. Now, Brian Albert's neighbor was later discovered as having a Ring camera that was pointing basically right at the crime scene, and it would be alleged that it was not working that night, but it was working in the morning when Karen found his body. So she went out at 5:30. This happened by probably 6, but from 2:45 to 3 o'clock, nothing. A lot of the ways investigators handled this crime scene was torn apart at the April 16th, 2024 trial of Karen Reed, and it was found that investigators even used solo cups to collect blood. Some samples were left on Proctor's desk for a week before being handed over to proper departments. They also used a leaf blower on the snow to find the taillight pieces. Footage of Karen's car at the Sally Port, and the Sally Port is where your car is kept if your car is needed for an investigation. There's footage of just a flock of these Boston cops standing on the side, chatting by Karen's taillight for hours. And it would appear they were on the opposite side of the vehicle. It was also found that 40 minutes of the hours-long footage is actually missing. So 40 minutes of that time that they were there is missing. When the prosecution was told to present this video, they had inverted the video to make it look like these officers were on the opposite side of the vehicle, when they were in fact on the side where Karen's broken taillight was. I'm just stating the facts. Now, Jennifer McCabe, Michael Proctor's wife's best friend, the lead investigator, and the prosecution's lead witness was also being torn apart during the trial, as her telephone records were pulled and she had called Proctor's wife throughout the night, and her story was just falling apart. The men in the household, Brian Albert and Brian Higgins, had also deleted their entire phone call history after that night. Brian Albert also renovated their basement, sold their home, and got rid of their dog, Chloe. And this was a long-time family dog. Alan Jackson, Karen's lawyer, tore apart Michael Proctor, completely shredded his credibility on the stand, and rightfully so. He brought witnesses up that proved Proctor would regularly drink and drive in his police cruiser. On June 28th, 2024, the jurors would pass a note to the judge stating that they were deadlocked after 2 days of deliberation. Judge Cannon would tell them to continue deliberating and stated they didn't spend enough time doing so. On July 1st, the jury would send another note saying they are still deadlocked and deeply divided. After a final attempt at deliberation, a mistrial is declared due to a hung jury. A mistrial occurs when a trial is terminated and considered void due to a jury's inability to reach a verdict or a procedural error. In this case, the mistrial was the result of a hung jury, which happens when they just can't decide. The Norfolk District Attorney is set to retry the case. Hours later, the Massachusetts State Police would announce that Trooper Michael Proctor has been relieved of duty, as he should. So, that is today's video. I would love to hear your thoughts on this one. I think I've made mine pretty clear in this video. I do think Jennifer McCabe is involved. There goes Max. And I do think that the Boston police force has a lot of issues that came out in this case. The amount of drinking and driving in this case just disgusts me. And the fact it's police officers, like, dude, that act is so selfish and arrogant, and it just should never be a thing. Like, that's like rule number 1. Do not drink and drive. But I don't want to make this video come off like I hate law enforcement, because that is the furthest thing from the truth. They are needed. I appreciate them for their service. That's not what I'm trying to portray in this video. I believe it is like anything else. There is good and bad. There's good and bad people, and good and bad people exist in every job. It's just when it happens in jobs like these, like police officers, medical fields, judges, or whatever, the consequences and effects of their actions are more detrimental to society. We see it more abundantly, and people lose their lives in more ways than one. I do believe there are good cops out there, and I appreciate that and their dedication to the safety and morality of those around them. I just wish these morals applied to everybody in that position of power. Now, before we get too controversial and someone assumes I'm being rude, I do believe Karen Reed is innocent. Personally, I think, if anything, if this did happen, it's a terrible thing, but I don't think she should be, her whole life should be ruined. People make mistakes, and I do believe in being held accountable, but I don't think she did it. I don't think she would have had to run him over with her car, like back up over him a couple times, I would think, to get 2 black eyes and all those gashes. I really do think that Brian was involved, and I think when he was drunk and in a drunken rage, I think he beat the crap out of John O'Keefe and his dog maybe reacted because John O'Keefe tried to fight back. Because that dog is trained to protect his family. I'm not blaming the dog at all. It's not right what they did, but I feel like animals, it's due to the environment a lot of the time. But thank you so much to Mandy J and Little J ASMR for recommending this video topic. I was very intrigued. I watched so many videos, read so many articles. Something needs to happen with the Boston Canton police. It does. And I hope that this case pushes for change. And I don't mean getting rid of it or in a negative way, but the people who are drinking and driving, who are supposed to be the ones preventing and promoting safety, that's just absurd. I've never understood, like, when you go out with your spouse drinking, I have went, but I had one small drink and that was it, because I would never want to be in a predicament where I was putting other people's loved ones at risk. I just think this is so selfish, and for people in their position, they need to be held accountable, and I think a little bit higher than others, because come on, man, like, it's disgusting. So thank you so much for watching today's video and hanging out with me. And I hope, despite my ranting, you enjoyed it and found it very relaxing.